Now, to get the program started, I'd like to introduce Lori Daniel Favors, Interim Executive Director at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College.
Greetings and good evening. It is such a pleasure to be here with you this evening. As mentioned by my dear colleague, Clarence, my name is Lori Daniel Favors, and I'm a racial justice attorney, and I'm privileged to serve as the Interim Executive Director at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College. And it is really a pleasure for me to be able to bring greetings for you or to you this evening, particularly because the Center for Black Literature, as you just heard, is such a phenomenal organization. It is a community institution, in addition to being one of our sister centers at our prestigious college. And the last several years in general, and 2020 in particular, have really shown us a glimpse of the power of social justice activism, which is really going to be something that we are going to hear highlighted in the conversation this evening. Indeed, in 1986, our center, the Center for Law and Social Justice, was born out of protest and in response to the systemic racial oppression and anti-Black policies that were harming our community at that time. And you fast forward several decades, and we saw last year, in response to the violent anti-Black racist murders of people like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others, communities all across the country had people flooding into the streets for day after day, week after week, and in many cases, months after months. And it was an escalation in protest, yes, but it was protest that was timed in such a way that it coalesced with a heightened level of activism and grassroots organizing. And as a result of that social justice activism, as a result of the marriage of these two elements, protest and organizing, we saw not just a change in laws that had been pending for years, but we saw laws that were designed to center equity and to center racial justice. We saw not just protest chants in the form of things like defund the police, but we saw actual manifestation of that chant into policy. And we saw what happened in small cases, but cases that are growing, yes. And we saw what happened when we were taking money away from entities that had a legacy of harm and redirecting them towards the needs that are so prevalent in communities across the country. Tonight's conversation is so important because the work of, I'm going to say, our elders at Howard, and I say that with a bit of laughter, thinking about the age of people who we are now calling elders, but our elders in the 1980s who were able to put down their mark, their line in the sand, and their commitment to social justice as a tool for change, even at an institution that was considered, that is an HBCU and a part of a long legacy of protest and activism. And so this evening, it is my pleasure to just be a part of this program. I'm so looking forward to the conversations that are going to be had tonight and to the further births to social justice activism that we have not seen yet, new ideas and concepts that we have yet to even implement or think of. I'm excited to see how this conversation lends to the overall protracted struggle for the liberation of people of African descent and the liberation for all oppressed people everywhere. And with that, I would like to hand the mic back over to my dear colleague, Clarence, and I look forward to the rest of this evening.
Thank you, Lori, for that, for putting things into perspective. As I mentioned, this is our Black History Month program. However, we're delighted to have with us Lori Daniel Favors and also our esteemed panelists. But now I'd like to introduce Dr. Brenda Greene, our founder and executive director at the Center for Black Literature.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much, Clarence. Thank you, Lori, for setting the context for this really exciting discussion. This conversation is so timely, as you said, given what we have gone through over the last few years. And although this is a conversation on the struggles and the protests of Howard University, it really is a mirror of what we've seen over the last few years, and it builds on the legacy of so many movements. And we will be hearing about those as we go forward. I'd like to thank our partners for this event. In addition to the Center for Law and Social Justice, which has partnered with the Center for Black Literature on a number of occasions, we are really have the CUNY Association of Black Faculty and Staff as a partner. Association began about 2 years ago. Mission really is to look at how we can support Black studies, Black faculty, Black students, and Black staff throughout CUNY, and to be on the watch for looking at those issues that affect us. The CUNY Black faculty and staff is comprised of faculty and staff across all of the units of CUNY. So this is part of our Black History Month, so we're pleased to have a partnership with them. I'm also very pleased that we have Aquila Work Songs as our sponsor partner for this program. Aquila Works, you'll hear about, is a communications and arts advocacy forum, and you will be hearing from founder April Silver. But I'd like to begin all the panelists for this wonderful program. It is a panel that really represents all aspects of activism. We have writers, we have scholars, we have arts activists, we've got the attorney. It's the embodiment of what we mean when we say social activism and justice. I'm going to begin by introducing, who is not on screen yet, the Honorable Baraka. He will be joining us at PM. The Honorable Ras J. Baraka is the 40th mayor of the city of Newark. His family has lived in Newark for more than 80 years. His progressive approach to governing has won him accolades from grassroots organizations to the White House. And his futuristic agenda includes the implementation of a groundbreaking partnership called Hire by Newark, a program that's sought to transform the economy by combining employment, procurement, and residential strategies. Mayor Baraka is also recognized nationally as a thought leader in the space of urban revitalization, and his defiance of a hostile presidential directive targeting the immigrant community with an executive order designating Newark as a sanctuary city solidified his status as one of the country's most progressive elected officials. And of course, you know that his father is the late Amiri Baraka, the legendary poet and playwright. His mother, Amina Baraka, is herself a renowned poet. He is a published author and well regarded in the entertainment industry for his appearance in the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. We also have Asha Bendelli. Asha Bendelli is an award-winning journalist and a New York Times best-selling author of 6 books. Police Violence Daughter was named Best Urban Fiction by Black Issues Book Review, and her widely acclaimed memoir, The Prisoner's Wife, was named by Barnes & Nobles as a great new author's book when it was published in 1999. 20 years later, it received a special National Foundation Literature for Justice Award. Her most recent work is a collaborative effort with Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors, When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir. And that opened on the New York Times bestseller list to exceptional reviews and received numerous honors. In her capacity as an advocate for racial justice and prison abolition, Asha Bendelli has built and managed a fund for more than 13 years that supports 100 organizations dedicated to ending the drug war and mass incarceration. Joshua Myers, the author of We Are Worth Fighting For, is Associate Professor of Africana Studies at Howard University. His research interests include Africana intellectual histories and traditions, Africana philosophy, music and foodways, as well as critical university studies and disciplinarity. His work has been published in Critical Ethnics Journal, the Journal of African American Studies, the Journal of Pan-African Studies, many more. His current book project, which is in production, is Cedric Robinson, Black Radicalism Beyond the Order of Time. April Silver is our final panelist. She's a seasoned cultural arts advocate, publisher, and editor and founder and CEO of Songs, a communications and marketing executive. Silver's expertise is in niche media, community engagement, vision planning, and crowdfunding. Silver is highly regarded for her holistic approach to public relations and to servicing the communication and public programming needs of independent artists and philanthropic foundations. She's also a former TV host of BET's My Two Cents. And in 2004, Mayor Baraka appointed her to Newark's Arts, Cultural Development, and Tourism Transition Committee. She has appeared and been featured on national and international outlets that include Essence, Ebony, Time, Newsweek, CNN, BET, HuffPost Live, and the Tom Joyner Morning Show. So we have really an exciting roster of panelists. This is called a roundtable forum, but it will really be a conversation. And you will have time at the end of the program to ask questions and to give your perspectives and get your own feedback on what you like to hear from our panelists. But we're going to begin now. And I'd like to begin with Dr. Myers, Joshua Myers, who is the author of We Are Worth Fighting For, History of the Howard Student Protests of 1989. Joshua Myers, you were committed, what happened here? Joshua Myers, you were asked, and I was going to say commissioned, to write this book. Please share with us your motivation for writing the book.
Well, it was absolutely an honor and privilege to be asked if I would consider writing the book. But, first let me say thank you to the Center for Black Literature and Kilo Work Songs and all of the other sponsoring organizations for hosting this event. But for me, it was almost a sacred duty, right, to respond to that question, because this is a story that is personal in the sense that it came out of a collective desire to sort of remake a place like Howard University that is really important to me personally, and as well important to Black people collectively. And so to be able to tell that story, I did not take lightly, and to be able to have skills that I could use in service to people who I strongly and deeply admire. It was an absolute honor and privilege to be able to accomplish that. And so that was motivation enough for me. It wasn't a case for, it wasn't the case of me doing this to advance American history or to advance the discipline of whatever, right? It was more of, I can do it, so I should do it. And it's a connection that I had with the people who were part of this movement that enabled me and motivated me to be able to do this work.
Talk a little bit more about that connection, because you also are a student at Howard University.
Yes, so I was a student. I went to Howard from 2005 to 2009, and over the course of my time, I was actually working in student government. My official title was Social Justice Coordinator. And beginning of our tenure in administration, we actually invited April Silver and Ras Baraka to speak to us. It was a hot
elders.
August. Yes, it was a hot August day. We were in Crampton Auditorium, and that campaign, that student government campaign, actually used clips from the protest in their materials. They were talking about taking it back to that moment. And so that was the first time I had ever heard from them directly speak about the protest. And, I was involved in a lot of different things over the course of that year, bringing a lot of people from Mumia Abu-Jamal from prison to Bob Brown to Charlotte O'Neill from Tanzania. But that was one that was very memorable because they were closer to us in age, but also they had actually done something on campus that was really important. And so when I went to graduate school, I met another of the members of the group that was at the center of this, which is called Black Near Force. And her name was Akanke Washington, and we had been a part of a number of different formations, study groups in Philadelphia. And she grew to trust me over the course of the 4 or 5 years before she who asked initially would I consider writing this text. And it was after I had helped facilitate the 25th anniversary of the protest on the campus when I came back to Howard as a professor in 2013, 2014. And so that grew from her trust to a project. I mean, it was literally almost, it sounds simple, but it was really that force, to use the name of the organization, right? Her trust in me, but also my willingness to really listen to what she was really trying to say when she asked me would I consider writing this particular text. I think she saw something in me that I wasn't necessarily able to see in myself until I sat down and thought about why it was that she was actually asking me to do this. And from there, I met April Silver and Jam Shackley. And from there, I met 40 other members of Black Nia Force, who all embraced me as if we were a part of the same family. And that was, and that has continued in 2-3 years since. And so that's something that is deeply important for me as a Black Studies scholar. It was affirming for me to know that I was, telling a story, which is often hard to do when people are still around, to be able to say, hey, right, you shouldn't say that or put that. But it was also like an affirmation because of trust, and the trust that was forged in the community that was created around the need to tell this particular story. It became so much larger than just history. It was about literally how we figure out how we collectively fight for our freedom in the particular moment then, but also in the particular moment that we have now.
So that's a nice segue to my next question, because first of all, you became a faculty member, but also you, in this book, you give a brief history of student movements, and then you give a history of the movement at Howard. So can you just showcase for us or discuss what's the history of student movements, and how does the movement of 1989 fit into the overall movement at Howard University? Because I think that's important to realize that this is part of a tradition.
And that was the first thing that Akanke asked me to do before she said, well, will you do the whole book? It was the first thing was do a history of every student protest at Howard before 1989, which there are many, right? Thankfully, the work of Eyes on the Prize, the filmmakers Eyes on the Prize, they fought. Judy Richardson recently told me this. She fought to get Howard's 1968 story into that documentary when many other filmmakers were thinking about, well, Columbia or San Francisco State or many of these other schools. And Judy said it was important for her to have a story where Black people are fighting for Black institutions in Eyes on the Prize.
Hear about Black institutions from around 1968.
Right. Yeah. And so thankfully, that happened. But what has happened since that, the assumption is that's the only time there was a Howard student protest, right? But you actually have to go further back. I found protests going back to the 19-teens. There was a major strike in 1925 that, students who felt that ROTC should not be mandatory for everybody. They went on strike and shut the university down. That leads directly to the first Black president at Howard University the next year, in Mordecai Wyatt Johnson. And so, I mean, that's a book too, right? When you think about the importance of the New Negro movement and how Black students at HBCUs were fighting the New Negro movement on their own terms, and you begin to see the first Black presidents at many of these really important schools, right? Same thing happens at Hampton and Fisk, right? And so we follow that into the 1930s, where Black students at Howard are protesting for anti-lynching legislation against discrimination in Washington, D.C. Into the 1950s, you get the era of Amir Baraka and then Toni Morrison and many others who are on campus, learning from Sterling Brown and other professors, E. Franklin Frazier, being confronted with the beauty of Black culture. And that, of course, is foundational to the Black arts movement, right? You have to start kicking these histories back a little bit, right? It is because Amir Baraka sits with Sterling Brown. It's because Toni Morrison is taking classes with many of these other figures at Howard's campus that you begin to talk about the Black arts movement. And so by the time you get into the 1960s, Howard had already had a legacy. And that just continued into the 1960s. And then after the 1960s, 1970s is a very important period, because now activists are coming to Howard to meet, because there's an activist faculty at Howard because of the students in the 1960s. And so by the time you get to the 1980s, that activist faculty is still there, but now we get the hip hop generation and things get a little bit more, how would I say, brash. And so the hip hop generation comes into the scene, and they're inspired by the same conditions of the Black University, but it's also the era of Reagan. It's also the era of apartheid South Africa. And so fight the power, right? That moment, right, is unique on its own terms, but it's also part of a collective and long genealogy of Black radicalism at Howard. And I think part of what makes the 1989 movement so unique and important is that they recognize that they are part of the genealogy. They didn't see themselves as the only people that had ever done anything on campus, right? And that is continued, right, in terms of their engagement with current students at Howard University. And so I think that's a beautiful part of that generation. And we may talk about this in a second, but when Ras Baraka founded the group organization, he wanted it to be called the Sons and Daughters of the Panthers, speaking directly to the relationship to the past. And so that genealogy is critical.
Well, thank you for doing that, because so often the history of the activism at Black institutions, particularly historically Black institutions, which tend to be viewed on the outside as more conservative, that gets lost. So it's really important to document that. So that's an important story. And this not only happened in 1989, but there's a history, and it's continued today around Black radicalism. I'm going to turn to April. I mean, one of the things that I love the sound of Black Neoforce. That is such a powerful concept. But April, can you talk about, why don't we start by just talking about the political situation you found yourself in when you came to Howard, and how you became involved in the student protests?
Thank you, Dr. Greene. Thank you to all of my panelists. I'm really excited to be here. I promise you, if we were sitting in the room together, you would have to kick me under the table, because to talk about this, I'm just so filled with joy and hope, and just good time. So I'll do my best. You can virtually kick me under the table if I'm going too long. But to answer your question, Dr. Greene, the political situation at Howard was so much of what our brother Dr. Myers, Josh, just outlined. It was the 80s, it was the Reagan era. Politically, it was the apartheid era that was happening. And so as 20-something-year-olds, many of us were coming into our own political consciousness. And for someone like my brother, Mayor Baraka, Ras was kind of steeped in it already, given who his parents are, Amina and Amiri Baraka. With regard to all of us that have what was going on in the larger Black community and in the United States was happening to us as well. Though we were 19, 20, 21 or whatever, it was happening to us as well. So the thing that was happening to us was the emergence of hip hop culture. It was what we now call the golden era of hip hop. And so we had people, or groups rather, like Public Enemy. We had KRS-One, we had Poor Righteous Teachers, we had who's from the Bay Area? I'm drawing a blank right now, but we had artists who were mirroring in their lyrics what was happening. And not that they were the first, but for hip hop culture, for the rhyming and the fashion, and it was a vibrant Black expression of young people, and that gripped us. But it was being led by folks like I said, Public Enemy, KRS-One. We had so many teachers through the music. So that was I don't want to say backdrop because that sounds superficial and one-dimensional. Hip hop was who we were, and we were being politicized on campus as well. And I started off being organized or organizing as a student with the California Club because I had got to Howard from Los Angeles, to Washington, D.C., though I was born in New York. From there, I went to the Alpha Sweetheart Court. And it was during that time that I met Marani Sanchez, who was in English class with me. And that's when I discovered Black poetry. I knew Black people were amazing prior to going to school, but I didn't know that I'd be sitting next to one of the legendary poets, Marani Sanchez. And he introduced me to his mom as I was learning about his mom, Sonia Sanchez. And the Alpha Sweetheart Court began to organize and bring Sonia Sanchez to campus. And that's how we began organizing, and that's how I began my lifelong relationship to her. And then I heard of this young woman who was fierce. Sister Soldier was on tour with Dougie Fresh and Public Enemy and Stetsasonic, and talking about what Black youth can do and the power of hip hop and how we should be self-determining. And that just gripped me. And so I sought out this young man to be a part of the organization that he started. I sought out Ras Baraka, and I became a part of the organization, Black Nia Force. And Dr. Greene, you know me well, so you know how I get down. You know that once I'm in, I'm in. You know, once there's something that's touched in my heart and my soul, I'm going all in. And so I went all in for the organization because I was learning so much about Black history. I was learning so much about myself. Much of my education at Howard came outside of the classroom. Much of it happened in Douglas Hall, room 116, because we debated and we fought and we struggled and we deconstructed ideology and we studied and we had book clubs, and that was every Friday. And I became immersed. So I'll pause there because I don't want to hold.
So if you can just go into the Black Nia Force, how did you come up with that name? What was the purpose of that?
Oh, I did not. I'm not that poetic.
I know you didn't come. But you decided to name why you named yourself Black Nia Force. Right.
Well, Black is for the people. And when Raz comes on, he can tell it even better. Josh does mention it in the book. Black stood for the people, us as a community. Nia is the fifth principle of Nguzo Saba, which means purpose. And FORCE is an acronym, actually. FORCE is an acronym for Freedom Organization for Racial and Cultural Enlightenment. And so that is the name of the organization. And we sought to develop ourselves individually so that we can support the community of which we're a part. We were much of the mindset on the college campus was not for personal gain. It was not for individual advancement. If you were Black and in school, you had a responsibility. If you were Black everywhere, you had a responsibility to give your talents, your resources, your evolution that was owed to the community. Yes, personal pursuits are important, and individual is important, but what's more important is the concept of I am because we are. And that was
right. So you talked about this energy, this consciousness that your group had. Now, if you think about how many students were at Howard University, weren't you kind of outside of the mainstream? Or would you say the majority of us were thinking this way? Because I have to say, when I think of how, I don't think about activism, but at that point, are you saying the hip hop movement was so strong and had such a major influence that you were able to bring all of these students together? And you talked about organizing and the poetry readings and studying. Was this a very small group of people, or was this a large group?
That's a great question. Black Nia Force was popular. Raz was popular. Raz was fire. Raz was pure fire. Raz and all of the people around were pure fire, but we were in the minority. This radical element is a minority element at Howard. And recently, I said on one of my social media platforms that there are at least two Howards. And what the world is being presented with right now, and I mean this, I'm choosing my words carefully, is the shiny, glossy, nice, conservative, excellent version of Howard. And there's a place for that. And I love Howard. It might not seem like that by the time we finish the conversation, because we're going to break down why we, took over the A building. But there's another side of Howard that is radical, that is not shiny, glossy, that is combative, but honorable in its combat. And we fought the university, as Sonia Sanchez taught me. We fought the university. We fought against some of the conservative views and the idea that this university would bring this Republican strategist, Lee Atwater, to be on the board of trustees. We fought against that because we love Howard, because we love Black institutions, because we wanted the university to be African-centered. And at the appropriate time later, I can read some of the core demands that we had. But there's a radical side. There's the side that is not the go along to get along side. There is a strain in Howard that is but long before us, and is reflected in the larger Black community, where we have to be self-determining beings. And that is important, that our view of the world is based on African-centeredness. I gave the example, and I'll pause after this example. As an English major, I was an English major. You couldn't graduate rather, without having passed a course in Shakespeare. Actually, I think it was Shakespeare and Chaucer, right? I took Shakespeare 3 times and got D's, and I think at the 4th time I had to pass, or I wasn't going to graduate. So I use it as a concrete example. There was no requirement that we study Bowen, that we even study Baraka, that we study Sanchez. Sonia Sanchez has not been recognized by the university. There have been bodies of people trying to get the university to give this woman who's given so much an honorary degree. They've not to date. So there was no embrace of Black culture beyond the surface, beyond the veneer, to the way that we felt that it should be. And that's what we were fighting for, to make the university in all aspects more African-centered in its curriculum and its focus and what was important. And that's why, after this full stop, we were demanding that there be an African-American Studies department, and that one could get their degree, a doctorate degree in African-American Studies, because you could not.
So let's do a full stop for a moment, because I asked you that question. So I think it's important to underscore the nature of student movements, that student movements are not generally led by the majority. Those who choose to engage in student movements are very often the minority. And so you have to, I think it's important, because there may be people on this call who are, even when you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, you look at what's going on today, you look at student movements across campuses, there is a core of people who take that lead, and hopefully they can get others to follow. But the nature of movements and the nature of protests is not generally everyone coming together. And I think it's important to remember that. You were committed and you persevered, and you had this driving energy. So I'm going to ask you to identify what those student demands were. You started, but just give us the general roster of the demands at a Black institution, because it's kind of ironic when you look at some of the demands that you had at this historically Black institution.
Yes, I'm going to talk fast, so bear with me. I have them right in front of me. The original document. We, the students of Howard University, demand a more accountable administration which will support a more Afrocentric curriculum. In addition, we demand an administration that identifies completely with our concerns. In an effort to bring about the above changes, we submit the following demands: promotion of a more Afrocentric curriculum by building up the African American Studies Department through the recruitment of noted and respected scholars and increased funds to the department. 1A, the establishment of an African American Studies graduate program will help and legitimize the department. Number 2, establish a university-wide program that would allow students to receive academic credit for community service. This will stimulate our involvement and interaction in the community. 3, effective changes in the financial aid process. I will not go on how many sections of 3 there are, but there are a lot. If anybody's on this call from my era remembering financial aid and the tragedy that was, you can relate. But that was number 3. Number 4, strike out the proposed 15% tuition increase. Number 5, guaranteed improvement in the general maintenance of Howard University housing. Number 6, enhance the effectiveness of security, increase the number of officers, and increase their wages. And number 7, the immediate removal of Harvey Lee Atwater from the Board of Trustees at Howard University because his interests are not consistent with the mission of Howard University. Now is the time.
That sounds like some demands at colleges across the country. People are still grappling with that today. And so what actually happened? How, if you can just share with us what you actually did to affect change.
Lee Atwater resigned. And Ariane Pope is the Black Neoforce member that came to Black Neo and said, I just got a call from my father. And my father read in the news that Lee Atwater, this Republican racist strategy, is now on the board. And my father asked me, what are you going to do about it? That was the father of Ariane Pope. And Ariane brought that message to the organization that you mentioned before, Black Neoforce. And then we went into action. 2 weeks, we had galvanized other student organizations, and we collectively decided that we can't make this just about, if we're going to take over the administration and shut down and do this, that, and the other, and try to negotiate first, but if the university doesn't listen, and they probably won't, then we will present the other demands. But we made it a point to bring in all of the other 6 demands, and we made the final one the removal of this racist from the Board of Trustees. And that's why we brought in the demand for more centricity. We were in alignment with better ways for those protecting us. So there were a lot of struggles embedded or intertwined in this one. And we thought it was our duty, having studied those who had come before us, to make sure that our fight was just not a narrow-focused one. So, like I said, he resigned. The president of the university, James Cheek, also resigned. Josh, you're going to have to help me with this. I said it wrong before. There was an African American Studies department, but there wasn't a graduate one. And as far as I know, there still isn't one. The financial aid process, I don't know if it got better. The students today will have to tell, but we had some very significant material victories. But what happened, and we'll talk about it more, I'll pause after this, really happened was that the students on that campus, students at Georgia State University, the students at Morgan, the students at Tennessee State, the students at Hunter College here in New York, students all over the world, and protest movements all over the world had their eyes on this group of students, and they said, wow, look at what they're doing. Look at, and we inspired students all over the country and all over the globe. And we spent the next 2 years organizing on that. So what really happened, Dr. Greene, is that we were fortified in our stance and in our principles. What really happened is that our lives were transformed. There were many people who showed up as soon as got national news. We had over 3,000 people in the A building, but it started in a room full of like maybe 30 people. But it expanded, and the lights and cameras came, and Jesse Jackson came, and we got national attention, and the cops tried to kill us, and Kathy Hughes saved our lives, and Marion Barry saved our lives, and it got attention. And so people grew up. People put their lives on the line. That's what really happened. And people's lives were changed. And there are some people still committed to this. Some people left, some people were traumatized, some people were hurt, some people don't like us still to this day, but really and truly, the spirit that lives within us to move forward and persevere and to fight for what's right, that's what got fortified.
And I think, as I said earlier, your movement mirrors what happened when George Floyd died. What happened in this country is when you bring all of these people together, you really affect change. Your movement also paralleled what was happening in liberation studies. Josh alluded to this, liberation studies around the world. So you had the in addition to having hip hop, but you also had the apartheid. And can you talk a little bit about that, and also your role as a woman in the movement? Because this was another change when you look at the movements of the 60s. The role, it appears that women's roles were more expanded. While you think about that for a moment, I'm going to put their questions in the chat. We're going to have Q&A afterwards, and as you think about questions, put them in the chat, and Clarence Reynolds will be reading them and facilitating them with the group. So how this aligned with international struggles around the world, and also the role of women.
I'll start with that one first. I didn't look at myself as a woman leader or a young leader. That was a lens. I was a worker bee, myself and Cherie Warren, with the work. Myself and Cherie Warren and Sharice Woodley and Ariane Pope and Keela and just so many people. We were worker bees.
I'm going to stop you for a moment, because you were more than a worker bee. What was your title? You and Ras Baraka.
I was executive minister of Black Neoforce, I guess runs parallel to president, if you will. I saw myself as a bee, let me say that. I had a leadership position. Okay. I was a servant leader. I led from the heart, and I led based on what I thought was impure. All of us, most of us did. And Raz tell me, because I wanted to be in the background so much, and I just wanted to be better and to study, because Raz was the speaker, right? Raz was the dynamic one. Raz was comfortable on the mic. And I was like, oh, do I have to do what? I have to, oh my God, that would be. So I would lead protests and rallies, and we would march to Cheek's house, President Cheek's house, and I would be in the back. And Raz would be like, you can't lead from the back. April, you're the head of the organization. Why are you back here with us, with security? And I'm like, well, the people know what to do. We've been studying this. This is, that is not needed. So that was my position at the time. Now I look back, it's a little bit different, and I'm a little bit more zoned in on woman leadership. And I'm just grateful to Amina Baraka and to my mother, and to my grandmothers. I see things a little bit differently, but at the time it wasn't about women leadership. It was really about the principle of the matter. It was about the righteousness of the moment. It was about staying the course. It was about struggling through all of the stuff that we went through as an organization. That was more important to me than anything else, quite frankly. But I'll pause, Dr. Greene, if you don't mind, because I know.
Because what Josh does in this book, and it's a story, as I said to him earlier, I like the fact that it's reading a story, the story of struggle, how it ends, what actually happened, and then the implications for now. And I want to turn to Asha, who you've been really involved as an advocate for racial justice over the last several decades in advocating for racial justice and prison reform. Can you describe your role in supporting activist organizations? What has been your role when you look at your story and how you became involved?
Thank you, Dr. Brenda. It's so good to see you.
It's good to see you too. You look great.
I do. Thank you so much for that. And Dr. Joshua, thank you for pulling together this important history. Clarence, for always holding us together. Lori and Mo Beasley, who's off camera. I so appreciate your guide, and April Silver, the queen, the master blaster. Just grateful to be in this good company. And just sort of before I get to that, there's so much brilliance that's been offered here. I'd like to add to that, if possible, the importance here of what Dr. Joshua has done, and April underscores this with, Marani and who's in class and who's in, being taught and who's not. April, I make this point in my master's thesis, who is being taught, who is considered canonical. And so I'm so grateful that you bring up the great Sonia Sanchez, our poet laureate, forever poet laureate, and the teacher to us all. So, thank you for that. But it's culture that's this enduring measurement, right? And so bringing that out, because it's easy to think about Howard as being, and many, Hampton, you can go down the whole list, as being places where you can't thrive as a Black person. There's stunning things. You're fighting for a Black Studies department when schools, like the one I attended in New York, win that in 1968. Sonia Sanchez, or 1970, Sonia Sanchez gets it in 1968 at San Francisco State University. So it's stunning to think that Howard doesn't have that. And in April, I'll add to this too piece about culture, and to your question about hip hop, I'll bring in the name Bruce Riley from the Bay. And I'll also say that back then in the 1980s, to your question about women, Queen Latifah is one of the last people to step out as a woman on her own, not having to be affiliated with the man's group. Right after that, we all got to be affiliated with the male cipher. We didn't have to do that in the 80s. And although I went to Hunter, and it's very different from the struggle at Howard, right? At Hunter, which is part of the City University of New York, the third largest university in the country after California and Texas, the dollar for dollar, the amount of money that was being taken out of public higher education is being put into the building of prisons under a Democratic governor, Mario Cuomo, who initiates that money. He takes that money that had been set aside to build low-income housing, and had been set aside on the day that Martin Luther King was buried. And so you see this extraordinary buildup of prisons. That's what we were fighting for. We were a public university. And we're saying, what are you going to do with the public dollars, with the public trust? Howard, of course, is different, as many Black institutions are different, right? Spelman lives and thrives and has Rockefeller money. Spelman's never going down. Many of our great Black HBCUs are struggling because they didn't have that kind of backing, but Howard does. And Lee Atwater is big. And the reason that Howard becomes so big is that Lee Atwater is not just white. They all have white board members. Lee Atwater is an architect of the Southern strategy, right? We don't only do this work in what's happening in South Africa. We do this work in what's happening right here. The destruction of communities right here. People call it the crack era. That's a misnomer. It's the Reagan era. It's the destruction of the social safety net. It's the enforced poverty, right? This is what's happening. Crack was never the problem like that. We may not like our family on crack, but if crack was the problem, Wall Street would have fallen apart. They sold and used more crack than anybody else. So it's not crack, it's Reagan, it's deregulation, it's all of these things. That's what Howard holds for us. That was the removal of Lee Atwater. Why that was so very, very important to a student government president like me in New York, who wasn't attending Howard, but who looked to Howard and looked to that removal of Lee Atwater and looked for a reclamation of culture, looked for not the everyone, but the enough, the loud enough to say we're Black and we're strong and we're not standing for this. And 1989 at Howard is very different than when I attended Howard a couple of years before that. And it's different afterwards. But 1989, with everything that's going on, not just hip hop is a part of our culture. It's not the culture, right? What does Amiri Baraka call it? Blues people, we're everything, right? We're blues people. And so hip hop reflects us. It reflects you, April Silver, right? That's what Sekou Touré teaches us. Make the revolution and the music will come. We did that. We did that. And so I just have to begin with gratitude. I know what your movement meant to me in a different struggle, in a different city, and for a different reason. But
Talk about that. Talk
saying,
about that.
how do you need
Talk
that?
about, I said, talk about that, you know, because I think part of what we need to see is the parallels, because, you know, and our audience, that the struggle occurs on many levels, and students are always the leaders. Students are always the leaders of struggle, aren't they? Or young people, or the artists. Artists and activists and students are always the leaders.
You know, I think in our history, you know, we've always had an intergenerational struggle. Students have often been, young people have often been on a front line. So we play different roles. In the best of our traditions, I think we include everyone, right? So it's Nelson Mandela is 70 something that will lead a post-apartheid South Africa, right? And he's not less relevant. He's, you know, he's 40 or something, right? In 1964. 30, right? He's about 40 in 1964. So it's not just young people, it's everyone. That's the African tradition. We throw no one away. Everybody has a role. So I don't want to.
No, I understand what you're saying. When I say the leaders, they are often the ones who end up being at the forefront. And of course, the struggle is a collective one.
Yeah.
But the people who aren't afraid to get out there in the beginning,
Right.
it's very often the young people, because and you can't do it without them. You can't do it without them.
Absolutely not. And you're right. So I just, you know, I'm sensitive, right? Because a lot of times we use these individual markers and we make that the entire of a
Generalized sometimes.
you know what I mean? Not all of us, but sometimes that happens. And so I'm so particular about language. This is Asha at 50, grouchy, specific, you know, and just so precise. But yes, so but the impact, you know, it has on us, and the constant through us is that is the same thing that it always has been. There's a consequence to freedom, right? This is what Mario Bedelli teaches us, right? After Emancipation Proclamation, there's consequences to freedom. And some of those consequences, there's questions that have to be asked. It's less time that is legal for us to read, write, study, be educated, enter theaters, libraries in this country than it hasn't been, right? So most of the time we haven't been able to do this. It's always been a race question. There hasn't been an answer of all the answers that had to happen post the Civil War to things like that. There's a political revolution. There's not an economic revolution. It's not a social revolution. It certainly isn't a racial democracy like Elaine Locke talks about. So I think that that's the constant, right? We talked about everybody having a right to go to school. The Students United will never be defeated. But that doesn't attach a race to it. Although we talked about race a bit, it doesn't have a race. Howard has a race. Howard's coming against Lee Atwater. Howard's saying we're Black, we're strong. Howard says we're Black near force.
And Howard is saying that, but you look at what's happening now, it's very embedded in everything. The race, you can't separate the race from social justice movements. And I'm thinking about the book that I read, and I want to eventually talk to you and Patrice about, you know, When They Call You a Terrorist, which has the intersection of gender and race and social justice movements. So I think it's really at the forefront now, and it's part of that fight that you do for prison reform and against the criminal justice system and for racial justice. So you're very much involved in helping organizations that are working on that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So most of my life, and probably the way I mostly define myself, is as an author and a journalist, but for at least the last 20 years, I've been involved in nonprofit work and primarily in philanthropy. I'm really proud to be the director of strategic initiatives at a smaller family foundation, Galaxy Gives. It's the family foundation of the Novogratz family, and we're new and we're young and we're growing. And I love how our executive director Billy Watterson often talks about this. He's talking about the thing we've never seen anywhere on the planet, which is a full and just multiracial democracy. Our lens is to approach it through the criminal justice system. But what Billy says is instructive, right? Because it's really about not disposing of people, which has been the ultimate, challenge of America. Who do we throw away? Who do we keep? And ultimately, that's Dr. Brenda, the work that I try to do is why I try to tell a whole history, a whole story. Sometimes it annoys people, definitely annoys my daughter. But I want to get all those pieces in, right? You know this, Dr. Josh. That's why the history is important. Don't decontextualize us. Say it how it happened. We don't have to put accoutrement around it. We don't have to make it. We don't have to do any of that. Just tell the truth. Tell the truth. And the truth is, they tried to dispose of many of us. And Black people aren't the only ones, but that's who I speak up for. And that's what I work to end in my area of this ecosystem, is to make sure that resources are put with our gratitude to those who are putting their bodies, to your point, Dr. Brenda, on the front line all the time. To whether,
Right.
Mhm.
You see where activism just takes so many forms. And I think, again, it's always important to see the history, to look at what Josh has done, to look at what happened, how that movement moved, and to look at what people are doing now, around your support and your advocacy for organizations that don't dispose of people. How heavy is that? That don't dispose of people. And I've heard April talk about that this was about Black radical love for Black people. And so as you think about the different lens that you're coming in through, I see Mayor Ras Baraka has joined us. Perfect timing. But we're gonna come back to that. But as we introduce him and he begins to talk, I want you to think about the lessons learned. What is the takeaway? The lessons learned from your own individual's perspectives as a historian and scholar, as the worker bee, as the organizational manager, the one who's getting the funds. All of you are coming at this from different lenses. So what are the lessons learned and how do we move forward? We're going to talk about that, but we're going to first hear from our mayor, Ras Baraka, and I'm going to ask if we can have the video turned on. Mayor Baraka.
I don't know what's going on. I'm trying to turn this video on.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to try to log in and out again.
Okay. So while he's logging in and out, do you want to start that? You just start that conversation. I also want to encourage our audience members to put your questions in the Q&A, because we're going to stop at 6:30. We're going to make sure that you have time to have a full discussion of your answers. So the panelists, please put them in the Q&A, not in the chat. I think I said chat before. But what are some lessons that you've learned? Yes, April.
I wanted to dig up Asha a little bit more than she's probably comfortable with doing. And my introduction to Asha, I don't know the specific name, time, or any of that, but I know Asha first. How I know her is as a poet, and she was and is our poet, going back and forth from DC to New York and rocking with Sister Soldier, who is a major influence in my life, and who turned into a Howard professor, Tony Medina, like that, and Kevin Powell, that whole crew, Kevin and Asha and Raz and Sister Soldier, like those were my peer idols, if you will. Those are my peers who I looked up to, who I learned from. And to keep it specific to Asha, just her poetry, her words, her sensibility, her soul. I just want to give her a little bit more props than what she's willing to probably give to herself. And just because we are the ones that will always give love and gratitude to those who have come before us, wonder is besides our love of culture, where Asha and I connected, is the time that Asha called Taylor to work on this, the mentoring project. And remember that day, like it was today, when I got the call from Mr. We had Susan Taylor in common as well in that incredible work. So I just wanted to big up that creative, loving, kind side of Asha, who had a mother to us all in some ways. The other part, say, Asha, I know I told you, members of Black News, as I've said to you, he named his daughter after him. Sean Houston, a member of Black Nia Force, named his daughter after Asha Bendelli. And I think I made that with them just a couple of years ago. That only say a way to let those who don't know Asha or who are not familiar with this era, how much of an impact and an influence that Asha Bendelli had on all.
I want to add to that. I mean, Asha brought up the importance of stories, and she is a great storyteller. if you read her books, and she's that kind of writing a teller. So the power of the story, I mean, The Prisoner's Wife, the coming back, I mean, that so much aligns in with what you've done, but that changed the lives of so many people. And I think it gave so many people a way to think about a way out and to be supportive. People who, and it was very, it was really courage to write that. Stories are so important. With language, the power of language storytelling is so important. So, as I said, we have on this panel all forms of activism. We have the poetry, the novelist, the fiction scholar, the social media, the public PR, and of course we have our own Mayor Ras Baraka. Welcome, Mayor Baraka. So nice to see you.
How's everybody?
Everyone's fine. And who do you have with you?
It just told you. Jua Yamache.
How are you? Very nice to see you. Great.
The eyes give it away.
Yes. And so you are joining us. We've had a wonderful discussion, kind of an overview of the movement and looking at what actually happened. And I want to zero right in and just ask, we had that overview of the movement. For the movement in 1989, what was a highlight for you and what was significant of that movement? If you can just take us right there. And I gotta unmute.
You said the movement in 1989. The last part I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, the significance of that movement for you. What was the highlight and the significance of that movement for you? Because we've gotten the layout, we've seen the role that April played, but we'd like to hear your perspective. You were her partner. I was going to say partner in crime, but the partner, her partner in that movement, leading that protest.
Yeah, I mean, it was an incredible time. There was a lot going on. Actually, it was young. We were young kids, really. Now you think about it, I was about 18 years old, and turning 19, and I was a teenager, so I was really growing up at Howard University, and in the whole Lee Atwater thing, and what we were doing at the university, we thought we were like toppling the whole place over at that time, that everything was going to change like the next day, all over the country, all kinds of things were going on. We thought we were a part of that. We weren't. We were doing something very significant, and the attention that we were getting you know, the people who were paying attention to us, you know, in the city level, at the university level. I think, you know, the changes that we were making, we intended it to be long-lasting changes at the university, real structural ones, right? So we weren't just, you know, just in the building for nostalgic purposes, right? We were reading and studying, and we thought that ultimately that we were living out the stuff that we were reading. So so it was really a high point for me, I should say. It was really a high point for me. We got to put all the stuff we talked about in some kind of practical action.
So when you look at, that was a high point for you. When you look at where you are today as mayor of the city of Newark, and you look at the issues that you're facing today, how do the student movements and that movement, other student movements and protest movements help you to, or align with the issues that you're facing today?
Well, I mean, many of those issues remain. You know, this is a complex system that we've been struggling against for centuries, right? And we're just doing the part that we can do in our time on this planet, you know, trying to push it a little further, make it a little bit more democratic, inclusive, and fight to stay alive, you know, and keep our communities and families alive. You know, as our struggles at Howard University, I think it inspired other people. It gives them the courage to go ahead and do the same kind of thing. We lay down a foundation that was laid down for us, and we continue it, you know, and I think other students and other people come behind us and they take our example and they take it a little further, you know, and the things that we went through and we going over, they learn from that, and they begin to try to formulate their own ideas and opinions. You want to talk, you don't want me to talk. His own formulate his own ideas and opinions on their own, and I think it's good. You know, and when those kids get out of college, you know, and they come into cities like Newark and other places around the country, hopefully it inspired them to become active and make a connection between the university struggle and community struggle, because it's really one and the same.
You're talking about the other people. Take that, but bring that back home to what you're doing in Newark, how that has impacted what you are actually doing and how you are embodying those principles in the work you do today.
Yeah, you know, I think that all of the stuff that we learned and read and proclaimed, you know, as teenagers, you know, we're trying to make that real. I mean, in Newark, you know, you see, it's one thing. Ideas and like theory and practice are two different things, right? My mother would say to me, like, look, your father was a ideologue, he was a professor, a writer, you know, a thinker. But when he went to the grocery store, nobody asked him for a job. So, and you know, that kind of plain thinking just lays really what it is to me, because at the end of the day, it's material issues, bread and butter, the material world that people are concerned about. Like, how do you feed people and make them safe and care for them in a day-to-day, right? And it's like how they destroy movements around the country. The first thing around the world, the first thing they do is put a blockade on you, right? To stop you from getting medicine, stop you from getting food, stop you from the economy from growing. So the people turn on you immediately because you have to take care of them. And if they don't think you can take care of them, how can you lead them and think for them, right? And so the basic bread and butter issues that we fight for in this city, like trying to make people's wages higher, give them access to employment, right? Trying to make their communities safer. Just the simple things like that seem simple to people are very real. Like, how do you make sure that they don't live in rat-infested places? Like, their neighborhoods, the police not killing them and their neighbors not killing them, right? So how do we do that? And it's a long kind of painstaking struggle, but you know, and we create policy and ideas to make these things happen. And the real problem is you fighting against a system that's designed that none of those things happen for you. So, and you're doing that with the resources that you have. You know, you're doing it with the resources that you have, which at times is not much, but you have to you know, use your imagination and do what you can.
We've always been a people that think creatively. I'm going to, Asha wants to contribute to that. Asha?
Hi, Raz.
Hi.
IJ, yeah, let me just bring your father back into this. And, with so much love for your mother. Father, benefited from being in a women's group, and looks like you got little Amity come back there, just as noisy, his own Bidori. But I need to, I'm not gonna be able to say this without crying. Because they are bread and butter issues. Your father held such a culture that when he came back from Los Angeles and brings that back here, and it grows into the East, my little girl attended Little Sun People. Her first prayers were Si Fai Zote Zenze Kwa in Swahili. They still work out here in Restoration Plaza, Brooklyn, where I live. People got those jobs. That's because of work your father brought home to us. And we kept it going. She attended Little Sun People. She never had a Columbus Day off. She had Malcolm X's birthday off. In the middle of a pandemic, 6 classes at an Ivy League institution. She attends Columbia. She got a 4.0. She's always been on the dean's list, but she did it with 4.0. These are also bread and butter issues. The people who taught her, the people who still work there, the people who still run it. And so it's not really like a disagreement, but I do want to say that there are people working because Baba Miri did,
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, the cultural and ideas and philosophical realm, you can't have theory without practice. And I think that that's necessary, and people live and breathe off of that, and they move forward off of that. Listen, my life is a testimony to, all of those ideas that I was taught and was around even subconsciously as a child. I mean, it shapes the superstructure, the ideas. So you can't separate them. I think what my mother was trying to say is, in order to win people over, right? In order to organize people, in order to move them from one place to the next, you have to feed them, right? And sometimes we get so caught up in the idea of it that we forget about the practicality of what people have to do every single day. Like, there are people still waiting for the workers of the world to unite. Meanwhile, our people getting killed on the corner. So you have to be smart enough and sharp enough. And that's what she was saying, to understand that the theory is important, the ideas are important to move, the superstructure, to move people into another place. But you have to be able to get down and actually show what those ideas represent to people, what they represent, because it's one thing about fighting for a better life for people, and there's another thing about giving them one. And that's important. And that fight is harder, right? It's harder. And they try to stop the ideas because they don't want more people to help us do that, right? Because once you win people over in the realm of ideas and thoughts, then you got more people, hopefully soldiers, that help you, till the soil. But the actual tilling of the soil is serious work, right? It's serious work, and it's painful because the results are not immediate.
And in the midst of that, you're keeping everyone motivated. You're keeping everyone united and moving forth. And you've done that in various roles that you've played since graduating. That seems like that's been your calling.
Yeah, I'm good at rallying the troops. that's I mean, since I was younger, I've been good at that. It's the kind of real organizing work to get the stuff to actually happen is really serious and committed work that you have to have people that are smart enough to organize and are committed enough to hang in there and see this thing through to the end. Because there aren't a lot of people that have the discipline and the commitment to see an idea from beginning to end, right? And that's why you have to know, you have to know who you have around you and what you need in order to get things accomplished or else, you know, you just be chasing your tail.
And can I
Seems
add
to
this,
me-
Dr. Greene?
Yeah, go on.
I was going to
Anita.
say, yes, the mayor, my brother Ras, makes a good point, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've always worked so well together. To take his beautiful points to the specific part about the protests, our roles were very distinct. Nobody wanted me, I'm being facetious a little bit, but nobody wanted me at the flagpole, you know, trying to rally the troops, right? Raz's job was that, and he was, I don't know if he's giving himself enough credit because he saw things through to the end for sure. But when we were occupying the administration building, Raz was outside with his brothers, keeping the police away from us as best as they could, even though the SWAT team came and landed on the building. And I was inside. Our roles were clear, and it was a natural flow. And that's important when you get into the nitty gritty of organizing, to play to people's strengths. But the least of what you need, and this is why I love us so much, because we have a friendship, and I don't mean Raz and I, but all of us who are still committed. The character matters. You can have the ideas, you can have the theory, you can have the abstract, you can have all of those things, and you marry that with the practice. That gives you operational structure, that gives you process, you know, that gives you the how-to. You know, when you marry the how and the why, it's a wonderful marriage. But for me, and I'm sure my fellow panelists, none of that matters or can be sustained if you don't have people with good character, if you don't have people who are committed to evolving, you know, every day. And my spiritual practice, that is fundamental. And to be quite honest with you, I don't, for the people that I work around today and for the past, my adult life, that's the determining factor. That's the determining factor. I need to be able to know, if I close my eyes, are you going to steal from me? If I'm not in the room, are you going to lie on me? Do you know how to access the truth and sustain it and hold it? That is what matters. One's integrity, their character, their moral strength, whether or not they can persevere, you know, is important, because you can talk about the theory, you can put up a good front, you know, as though you're a good practitioner, but it all comes out in the wash, my mother would say. And I used to say this a lot, you know, who are you when the lights are off and the doors are closed? So I just wanted to add that to what my brother and sister are saying.
You know, it brought up a point. I was outside that administration building for days without sleep. You know, I would sneak in the building and try to get a nap, and the ladies would wake me up like, you got to get out. You know what I mean? Give me some food here and there. I would, and that's how I was able to see the police and the helicopters come. I was on the School of Social Work, standing there, almost sleep standing up. And you know, you could see them landing the helicopter, putting people in there, landing them on the roof. I mean, it was a wild scene, and it woke me up completely. And we panicked.
It woke you up on many levels, yes.
We almost panicked. Mike Tyson said, "You got a plan till you get punched in the face," right? So we had it all planned out, and they started dropping them people on the roof. The plan started changing.
But you know, this invisible thing, this spirit, this energy, there's a video that I watched, Raz. I wish I had it. I would have given it to our virtual events manager, but I wasn't prepared. But there's a video of you being interviewed, and you talked about Lee Atwater gotta go. And I promise you, all of that energy and all of that rah-rah was there in the video. And maybe I'll put it, y'all find it, put it in the chat or whatever. But there was a curl of your lip at the end that said more than what your words did. And it was that invisible manifestation, that spiritual manifestation that manifests in the curl of your lip, that spoke to a level of conviction that was quintessential us at that moment. And so I just had to share that, Mr. Lady.
We were having a real physical fight out there.
Right.
Trying to keep those cops from coming inside of that building. I mean, it was real out there. It got real for a second. Thank
I
God.
want to make, I want to for a Q&A because we can always come back.
Yeah.
But before we go to that, my question before we go to Q&A is, what are the takeaways that you have from your perspective in this movement? As I said, we have many different perspectives: the scholar, historian, the cultural arts activist, the journalist, writer, manager, the mayor. You all have different perspectives. So just what is your real takeaway when we look at activism today and either student movements or movements in general? What can we leave people with?
I'll go ahead and just underscore what April said a little bit before. It's the main thing. It's the character piece, right? And I think that this wasn't true across the board. But it certainly was true then. You didn't have to be like a brand influencer. You didn't have to do like your job. You did something.
What do you say?
Right.
So
And
a brand influencer. Elaborate on that.
You're asking me if I'm a.
No. What I'm saying is that you could be actually committed to struggle more than than your number of followers. More than that, like you know, and I don't think there's anything wrong with amplification. I think we should use social media. That's not the problem. I think that there was a certain self-determination and self-ownership of what our demands were that you now April read all the demands, Raz, earlier. There was a self-determination. There was a rooting to culture. Dr. Joshua, you can probably say this better. And now I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure what exactly we're loyal to. Are we loyal to a brand and our own brand? Or are we loyal to a principle? And that's that culture piece. I just think we got to brand, we got to reconnect, I believe, in that. I mean, I sometimes I don't even know what people fully stand for. We talk about, for example, where I work in abolition. People never read W.E.B. Du Bois, never even know what abolition democracy is. I'm lost. I'm like, have you read Black Reconstruction? Where are you grounding your theory? And I stay confused. So I just.
There are many people confused. That's I guess is your point, right? There are many people confused. Yeah. You have to zero in. It's always that conflict between theory and practice.
We need some
and
more
you know,
bookstores.
why are you doing this? Yes,
We need some more bookstores.
We need some more. Yes, exactly. So why don't we go to you, Joshua?
Yeah.
Dr. Myers, I'm sorry, Dr. Myers.
No problem. I mean, it's okay. Either one is fine. But, you know, I've been teaching Black Reconstruction in America in my classes for the last 8 or 9 years now. And it's just my little part because that text really helps us understand American history from a Black lens, but also from the relationship that Blackness has to the very project of America, right? And what happened during the Civil War and Reconstruction in terms of Black self-determination, right, is that impulse never went away. And so that's my takeaway, right? And so the same drive that, you know, allowed African people to walk off the plantation during the Civil War, right? That's still with us. And that has to be, you know, cultivated, but also protected in terms of our political projects today. We need to protect that energy of self-determination because that's the thing that has sustained us. And when you think about self-determination, that what animates it is, you know, love. You know, April Silver has taught me a lot about spirit, right? Love, spirit, faith. Black people are nothing without those principles. And as someone who was writing the history, one of the challenges that I faced was, how do you narrate a story that's about spirit more than it's about you know, the rudiments of relationships between structural, political, and economic forces, which are there, right? But Black people come to that with spirit. And so that has not been translatable with the methodological tools of the historian in ways that allow us to really understand that. And so, you know, I've been trying to do what, you know, Asha and Ras were doing with poetry in the text on the history, so that we can actually see how the spirit moves in terms of how they did what they did. And so for me, that would be the takeaway.
You're saying you really are speaking to all forms, and you know that's an interesting question. The how do you capture the spirit? And I think about, I didn't read Black Reconstruction until I started teaching African American literature. I had never heard of the book. And then when I look at what's going on now in this country, I keep thinking, this reminds me of Black Reconstruction. What happened? You know, the kind of backlash we're getting. So it's really important that you're working with undergraduate students, and also,
Yeah.
and that they're being exposed to that. I think that's really commendable. Okay, April, do you want to, and we're going to come back to Ross, and then we'll go to Q&A. Yes.
Yeah, I found myself getting emotional right now, and I don't tend to do that, not on cameras. But something you said, Josh, the only piece that comes to me now is that we're married, right? We are married, and I mean that in an abstract, pure, honest way. Because in the same way that you may say, Josh, that I've taught you about spirit of and that which is invisible that sustains us, and I could talk about Asha and her poetry, and I could talk about Raz and the curl of his lip, you know, and those who are in tune can relate to that. I am still married to your intellect, to the intellect of Jules. It is, you know, as Raz said, the combination of the practice, and is also that with the material and the immaterial, you know, that which we feel and that which we articulate, you know, that which we try to quantify. So I'm honored by your intellect, Josh, and what you've been able to do. And I always tell people, and I say this lovingly, and you, Spirit has heard me, I always tell people, read the book that he wrote. And if you're not a scholar, just get through the first 5 pages. Because you do an excellent job of blending the scholarship and the intellect and the cool and that analysis, which informs me and it opens my heart. And then you do an excellent job of telling the story. And that is your brilliance. So the larger thing here, and I say this all the time, and I think I talked Asha's ear off and other people, this is so bigger than Howard, right? It's bigger than all the sides of Howard. It's, you know, we're talking about sacred ground. We're talking about the work of our hands. We're talking about, you know, who we were before our 2 feet earth. We were already connected. So I got to say this part before we go to Q&A, because it's a perfect segue. That thing us together in a moment in time that made us persevere is not just that we did the protests and took over the administration building, and then we built Peace Productions when we were fighting the police in Virginia State. I mean, not Virginia State, in the state of Virginia, that Labor Day right after, and we toured the country, but traveled to other east to talk about, like Raz said, to teach people. But then it birthed the hip hop conference. And that hip conference that was founded 30 years ago this week, actually, we did that too. And so all of the things that we take for granted, pop culture, meaning hip hop fashion, the just of hip hop and activism, that was first done on a college campus called Howard University with the people on this panel and the people in the chat room. Like, so the biggest takeaway is that when we are quiet and we aim to fulfill our destiny, and if that destiny involves loving on Black people and doing what we know, and we didn't get everything right. We're still traumatized. There was a young Dana Bingham. I remember the first time she said, April, I want to do a video on the protest. This was like maybe 15 years ago. I couldn't talk about it. So we didn't get everything right. So the takeaway is to stay true to who we are and to always be evolving. because there's work, personal destiny, I think, that we have embraced, and we've laid some foundation because others have done it, but with it, and to be okay, uncomfortable, but because that there's growth in that as well, and I think that's what we represent.
Thank you so much, April. Before we go to Q&A, any major, you've talked about some of the takeaways, any that you would like to emphasize or add?
Well, I think that what everybody said is right on point. You have to understand the time was different. You know, when I was in college, I was going around the country with Asha and Kevin, reading poetry all over the country. I was going to conferences every other month, you know, Malcolm X conference, the Patrice Lumumba conference, that conference. We was going to universities everywhere, talking to people who were interested in revolution and all these. There's a different time period, right? So, I mean, the music was different. Everything was just, it was a different feel. And reading was something that you needed to do. You couldn't go to these things and not have read anything. You cannot talk to people and not know what you're talking about. Like, you had to actually read the stuff that you're professing today. Like, you can get on social media and have a fake name and a fake whatever and say what you want to say and not have read anything. And so all of this movement is centered around stuff that's not real, right? And the culture is missing, and the love of intellectualism and the academic part is gone. And people have to embrace that. Look, Black excellence is commercial success. That's what people believe that, right? So when they say Black excellence, they're talking about commercial success. They're not talking about Frederick Douglass. You know what I'm saying? They're not talking about a self-taught man, you know what I mean, who escaped slavery and impacted the world. They're not talking about Du Bois or Garvey. They're not talking about these people. They're not even talking about my father. They're talking about like movie stars and entertainers. And that's what Black excellence is, commercial success. And we have to change that. And the last thing I'm gonna say is the system is flexible, right? And so it's been able to absorb the blows that we give it, right? It's been able to absorb it, right? And we have to be as flexible if we want to see some real change, going forward. We have to be as flexible as that and smart and committed to what it is that we want to see accomplished. But
I think that your group, and I didn't realize the strong connection between all of you, with you, Kevin, and I should have known. In April, I didn't realize all of you around the same age group. You're the leaders now, and so you're the children of the 60s. The children, you're it. You're running things, and you're embodying that. And listening to you talk is reminding me of the conversations that I hear from Sonia. She talked about how everyone used to get together and they talk. They have these conversations and social. So you're carrying that tradition on, and I think. This is a space to create it. We have to continue to have those spaces. So I'm going to ask Clarence. Clarence is going to share because he might be able to see more clearly. We have some questions, and I guess they're directed to certain people. So we're going to spend the next half an hour or so just.
Half an hour or so, yeah. First of all, I want to thank you all.
Thank you so much, yes.
Thank you all for such a stimulating, invigorating, and informative conversation. I mean, there were some gems in there, and I've jotted a couple of things down, and I can't wait to see the recording of this later, just to get some ideas to remember what's been said or recall what's been said. But I'm going to start a couple of questions here, and the first batch are not to anyone in particular, so I'll just read them off, and you all can answer in the way that you feel like who wants to be first to do this. The first question comes from Toby Mujib Balagoon. Toby says, something that I always appreciated was Black Neo-Force's emphasis on political education. Can you talk about how the organization encouraged Howard students to want to study and study deeply before they acted?
Well, I think and April can speak to this, I just think when we went and found the most popular people we could find at first, right? That's what we did. And the idea was if we started doing specific things, that we were already affecting the culture on the campus, that we can affect it in a positive way. We chose a Friday evening to study on purpose because that was the night everybody was going to go out and party. We decided to study on those nights first. And the meetings that we held were study sessions, right? We read and we brought lecturers in and we did all those specific kind of things, which helped us to embed ourselves in the study and other people as well.
Yeah, it's some of the Fridays in Douglas 116, it was required reading. You didn't have to be a member of Black Neoforce to do the readings, but we would design programs around what was read. So our Friday meetings in Douglas 116 were open to everyone. And it was just a matter of reinforcing that, identifying a book. Raz, would you believe I still have those flyers that we made? I literally still have those flyers. So we were reading Chancellor Williams and just so many people. I could go on and on, but it was required. And if you wanted to show up and be a part of the conversation, then you do the work. But I don't want to say required reading. It was what we made available. It was what we organized around different topics and different things, and everything from relationships to family building to community building to political theory, that we promoted it. I used to do hand-drawn flyers and go around campus and stick them up. That's how I got recognized by who were at the time the leaders of Black Neoforce, because they were trying to figure out who was this person that would come in the back of the room, not say anything, but was always passing out flyers about our meetings. I wasn't a member. Nobody asked me to do it. I was excited to be in the room where people were studying Black history, American history, and I just took it upon and I put up flyers in the women's stalls in the bathroom. If I could have gone into the men's bathroom and put up flyers there, I would have, if I could do it without getting in trouble. But it was a drive in me. Nobody asked me to do that, but I just did, and that's how I run my life still.
Now, I would just say that you all have real connections to some of the most important scholars of that period, and you were able to bring them in while you were reading their particular text. I came across, you showed me the flyers, I was just blown away that you had Tony Browder, you had Dr. Ben come, you had Francis Cress Welsing come, you had Tony Martin come, and on and on and on.
We had Sonia on a regular basis. Mama Sonia came on a regular basis, yeah.
You all brought your, you all brought.
Yeah. Add this, if I may, Dr. Joshua, because I'm gonna ask you to underscore me on this, right? We also in our Black Student Union in Hunter had our political education meetings on Fridays, although sometimes we all came up when we were in Harlem and went to the Neoforce ones. But this is Friday. What is Friday? Friday is Juma services. Why do we know that? Because Minister Malcolm brings us. And why do we think about that? Raz, because your father ensures that we know this culture. And I just don't ever want to get away from the importance of that continuing line, because it's not there now. We forget it now. It's like when I say things about being Black, it's almost weird. Like I don't say BIPOC. I don't speak for Black, Indigenous people. I don't. I speak for me, for like my community. And I stand in solidarity with other communities, but I speak for mine. And that's okay. I don't ask Palestinians to speak for mine. I stand in solidarity with them, but it's different. And there was a time that we knew that. And I feel like, when I'm asked to stand up and say I'm anti-racist, I said, I don't talk to Black people like that. That's for white people. White people got to be anti-racist. I'm Black. I'm talking about Black people. And there was something that wasn't broken by 1989 in a certain kind of way. And I think that this is why the meetings are all on Fridays, because Minister Malcolm teaches us that, right? So whether we're at Howard in DC or Hunter College in New York, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Does that sound crazy?
I know.
Monica Faulkner asked, Monica Faulkner asked, decade after decade, students of color are faced with the same emotionally draining and distracting challenges and barriers, often due to lack of awareness of previous student struggles and the lessons learned from them upon arriving on college campuses throughout the country. What can academic scholars, educators, administrators, and staff do to help interrupt this seemingly continuous cycle?
Well, scholars can start by actually being committed to struggle, right? I think we have a gap, a lack of committed scholars. We have scholars who are more committed to, their own narrow work in their own discipline than they are to actual struggle. So that's step one. But I think an important step is something that I felt when I was trying to do activism on campus, and that is we need to remain attached somehow to students that had recently graduated. One thing I learned doing this book is that there are a lot of recent graduates, like in the early parts of the 80s, who remained attached to Howard students who were doing activist work in the later part of the 80s. And what happened when I was a student activist is like, we lost so much knowledge from students that graduated that we tried to reinvent the wheel because there was no mechanism to have those students remain with us as they processed out of the university. And so we need radical alumni clubs, if that makes any sense, right? That maintain connections to what students are doing. And I think faculty can help facilitate those kinds of things. And also, I think I want to give a shout out to your faculty mentors, Ethelbert Miller, Eleanor Traylor, Ron Walters, so many others who are really critical to a lot of this story as well. And the surrounding DC community, the elders of the surrounding DC community, like Abdul Ali Muhammad, for instance, who are much very significant in terms of this particular story. And those connections can help foster this particular continuity as well.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Dean Keene, who we know as Dean Keene, who's now Damani Keene, and Ife, his wife, was the head of Residence Life, and he's in the building, so to speak, the virtual building. So I just wanted to shout him out because talk about support and allies, that has remained over the 30 years. So salute to you, Dean Keene, and to the Keenes, period. I wanted to add that.
And staff members like Ms. Roberta McLeod, for sure.
Oh, we never forget.
But lo and behold, man, Roberta, and the All African People's Revolutionary Party.
Yes.
When we was on Howard, there's all type of people there who nurtured and cared for us. I don't want people to believe that like this was a magic trick, I would be coming from my dormitory after the protest. I'll be coming, getting off and going to class, and there's a food truck, a vegan food truck dude would give me hot dogs and vegan hot dogs and book bags. Like, hey, here you go, brother. Just offer the strength. Like, I didn't know what the heck was going on, It's just the people was caring for you at that time, and the nurturing environment made you believe that what you was doing, you were supposed to be doing it. Like you weren't an anomaly, Right. And that environment is what's missing. And that's all cultural. Cultural and social spaces are gone for people to thrive in who they are and believe in themselves. Like, we think in order to have national and international struggle, we got to give up who we are as people. Like, in order to unite with these other folks, we can no longer love being Black. That's like ridiculous. And all the other kind of things that come with that is extremely important. Like, if you want to be my ally, you have to see me as who I am and love me too. And that's the whole purpose of this. The foundation of that thing is like, love me as who I am and who I can be. And the last part I'm gonna say is that I've seen so many speakers when I was at Howard University, and the faculty and staff can do that. I saw so many people come in there and speak. I mean, so many scholars, Jawanza Kanjufu, Naeem Akbar, all kind of people came in and spoke to us. Kwame Ture, all these people were speaking. We were able to go there and listen to these people speak, you understand? And that stuff is just not happening like that anymore, and it needs to.
I'd like to add something. I think also just to follow up as working in the classroom today, because you may not have access, but we have so many other ways to bring those speakers in.
Yeah.
So we have to use the media, we have to use video to incorporate that into our curriculum. We have to, that we're modeling what we want our students to do. If you're talking about, being aware, and you have to require that. They're not going to do it on their own. You know, I require my students, you have to attend. At a predominantly Black college means that we are educating all of you, and you have to attend a certain number of events, and you're going to get credit for that because that's part of your education. Your education is within and outside of the classroom. So just an answer to the student, you had access to all these leaders. Sometimes we don't, or that there's a certain number of scholars and activists and writers that are part of the curriculum. If we don't do it, who will?
And Dr. Greene, just because I said this at the beginning of the program, so for those who came later, we can't move too much further without giving a shout out, or just more than a shout out, our love to Sister Soldier, right? So Raz is talking about the people who came and spoke. Soldier came and spoke and stayed and came back and helped us, build. Those were deep relationships there. That just shaped my life and so many other people's lives. And I don't want us to forget. We already talked about Sonia, but I don't want us to forget Donald Temple. Sonia called Donald Temple for him to come in and give us guidance. And when it was time for us to leave the building after the occupation of the building for the several days, he was the one that reminded us, and he put a clause in the agreement that we couldn't be expelled. We had caused a lot of trouble there at Howard. And I know the first time that I heard that we were on the terrorist list, I think in the State Department, after the protest, because we disrupted, it wasn't just about disrupting Howard, but we messed with their money. We messed with their reputation. Howard was the golden child of the HBCUs. How dare we protest that? We kicked Bill Cosby off the stage in his face. So we was messing with people's money. So Donald Temple was the one that said, we got to make sure we have a clause in here that you don't get expelled. And we all graduated. So I just wanted to throw that.
By the grace of God.
Yeah, so so Sister Soldier, I just want to give love because she was a guiding force, for us. And I just wanted to say that before we forgot.
This next question comes from Steph, and I think this is a question for everybody here on the panel. What message of hope does the panelists have for young people entering college in this era? I think it's a very...
I would say everything you need to know is at your fingertips. Like, you living in a generation, a time period now that there's nothing that you cannot know. All the information, and you can learn it in different languages if you like, right? Because it's right there. I would have to go to the Moreland Spingarn Library and sit in there, and get vertical files. They send me information. I would sit there and read and so forth and so on. You can sit at your computer and get all this information. You can get it translated for you. You can see these people speak. As Dr. Greene said, you can get primary documents. You can do all this stuff right now. Everything that we're talking about, you can know. And you can know more than we know. All of this stuff is right at your disposal. You have greater access now than anybody in the history of this world.
I agree.
Go ahead, April.
No, go, Asha. Go.
I just want to underscore what Raz says, and just, I try to keep it on that. Minister Malcolm teaches us of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. And not only, is all of that there, there are survivors there. If you're like me and you see the flaws in Judas and the Black Messiah, go to Chicago. Chairman Fred Jr. is right there on the west side along with Mama Akua. You can find out what happened. All of this is here, and people are accessible as they were accessible to us, and the instruction is there. And part of that instruction is, how do we push it further? And the biggest thing that gives me hope is that I know this: we were the people who were never meant to survive, right? We're the people who walked thousands of miles from the inland, survived the dungeons that no one was supposed to survive, the first solitary confinement cells around the west coast of Africa, where there were 47 prisons and dungeons. We survived that. We survived the 3 months across the big water. We survived the plantations. And Diana Nash will go to my friend's class, Dr. Errol Henderson, and say, I loved you before I knew you. That's our history. That's who we are. That actually happened. We're the children of the people who were never meant to survive, and yet here we are.
One thing I would note about the students who were involved in the protests is that a lot of the bonds that were necessary in order for, and the bonds and connections that were necessary for the protest to be successful were actually forged when those students first got to campus. And so one of the lessons that I take from that is when you get to college, find like-minded people, because those are going to be the people that sustain not just the college experience, but your life experiences, especially if you are engaged in struggle.
That's a great point.
I would add this to what everybody's saying, in agreement with everybody saying. I'm thinking of Nana Camille Yarborough and so many of our elders. And if I was a smart poet, I would have thought of this line myself, but I'm not. So you don't quote me. A bad day only lasts 24 hours. And I think what we could take away from that, to the question of what hope can we give, is hope itself. So in addition to the connecting or whatever, there's a certain perseverance, there's a certain visionary lens that we have to have where we can see past the trouble. You know, the 24 hours might be rough, it might be hard, it might feel unbearable, but there's something about not giving up. There's something about about moving forward, about talking to yourself, about speaking positively, about, as we say in my practice, eradicating fear. Recognizing that fear can really immobilize you. Fear and all kinds of things that are emotional, but there's something about believing that you are an evolutionary being, you know, that there is more light than dark in the world. That's completely inspiring. That's completely inspiring if you let it, that there actually is more light than dark in the world. The dark, I think it was Sonia Sanchez that said, the dark is performative, the dark is popular, the dark is front and center on stage, and the dark is loud and is always moving. But there's something about tapping into that intangible thing called hope, and pushing forward and not giving up. And it's hard, but it's doable, and that will help you to see another day. And it's not easy. Sometimes you might need to talk to a friend or to a therapist, you know, or to listen to some positive music, or to treat yourself to a mango slice. You know, my favorite is cashews and strawberries. Asha, remember when we would do that work, and Susan always fed us with white fish and cashews and, you know, all of these exotic foods, you know, those kinds of things. If there's a healthy embrace of positive behavior, tap into that, because all of the reading, all of the studying, working with other human beings to push for good is difficult. It's hard. There's going to be struggle. There's going to be fight. It's going to be contradictions. So Soldier used to always tell us to work to minimize your contradictions. But none of that can happen if you don't believe that tomorrow is brighter, can be brighter than today.
As Miriam Kaba says, the prison abolitionist, hope is a discipline, right?
Yes, say that. Say that.
Say that again, Josh. Dr. Josh, I didn't hear you.
I was saying that as Miriam Kaba, the prison abolitionist, has often said, hope is a discipline.
Absolutely. And it might feel weird because it sounds intangible. It's you know, it could be an invisible thing. Like, how do you hold on to that? How do you quantify that? How do you intellectualize that? Sometimes that's the problem. Sometimes the fact that we try to quantify that which is not quantifiable is a problem. We need to sometimes let that go. And I always say, because my elders have taught me, there's a difference between being quiet and being still. And I think particularly in this generation, where everybody is quantifying their popularity and their worth by numbers, oh, we need to pull back. That's not the determining factor about whether or not you're valuable in this world, is how many followers you have. That's not the determining factor. We've been made to believe that. We have a generation that doesn't know anything other than that. but that's problematic.
Right. Joyce King, thank you so much. I really enjoyed those responses. Joyce King writes, she says, really powerful comments from each of you. And then she says, hello, Asha. To each of you, looking back at what you know now, what would you say to your 18-year-old selves?
Raz, you have one.
Lord have mercy. I mean, it's so long. It'd be so much that I probably would say, you know, to my 18-year-old self. But I'm gonna tell you that I don't think I would change anything, and that's because, like, everything that I went through and did, good and bad, centered me to where I am today. Like, I don't think I would be the same person if it wasn't for the things that I went through. And I think I went through these things because I was supposed to. And you know, it helped me get an understanding of a lot of things about myself, about other people, about the struggle, the world, all of that. And I think it's important. But, you know, I would tell myself, slow down. Like, you know, the word that April said, be still sometimes. And, you know, be introspective. Because a lot of times we're reactive to everything that's going on around us. Like, we're reactionary, we become reactionary. And we you know, you just have to be still, like, and really be introspective of where you at in your life and what's going on, and don't take yourself so seriously, right? You know, just do the work, enjoy your life, and focus on the things that you want to bring into existence. They can really happen. Those things can really happen. It can really happen. And if you really, like, focus on that at 18 years old, the things that you are dreaming about are small once you begin to start, if you really focus on it.
Can I use my response to defer to what our brother is doing? In March of 2022, next year, there's going to be the National Black Political Convention that is being hosted by the city of Newark and the city of Jackson, Mississippi. And I just want to use my time to defer to that, because it's happening on the weekend of the first National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana. And so my brother invited me to help organize that with some other amazing, brilliant people. The city of Newark is hosting, and the city of Jackson, Mississippi. And I would encourage everyone to follow RJ Baraka on social media to get more information. We will be announcing speakers soon, but hats off to all of and there's a film on the actual political convention 1972. It was just released, I think, last month. William Greaves is the filmmaker who was there, and it's out now. One can watch it, just look it up, because I'm not remembering the name, but I just want to use my time to, what's it up?
Nation Time, Gary. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So here Baraka is it again, you know, the new Baraka, or the extension of the Baraka family that's present in the administration in Newark. So just follow him and get more information, because the city of Newark is doing amazing things, and I'm honored to be organizing that with my brothers and sisters.
April, that is so amazing. Raz, that is so amazing. I'm annoyed that I'm hearing about it in public first. So y'all numbers. So I'm just saying, because Joshua, to your point, that yes, we did have a relationship before. It's about to be on after. But we're at Nation Time. And I'm so proud that you're doing that. And we'll just bring the name Chokwe Antar Lumumba into this, right? So there's a legacy. That's the hope, that there is a legacy. And that's the thing, you know, Dr. Brenda, that I would say. At 18, I don't know that I was sure I was going to live. I don't know that I was committed to that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. You know, acted like I was. I kept getting married really young. I won't tell you how many times.
So that's heavy. Wow.
But I don't know that I was sure I was going to live. And so I didn't always act like I was.
Well, it's better to do that at 18
I'm
Then
not
at 38, if
18.
you're gonna do it, I always remember when Nikki Giovanni told me, she said, you know, everybody has to mess up sometimes. So do it now in college and not when you're 30. I'll never forget her saying that.
Yeah,
You know,
and
we
I'm
all go through that.
choose ourselves.
Huh?
Let's choose ourselves in the full season of our lives. Our 18-year-old selves are taking care of our 98-year-old selves. Let's choose that full season of our life. And it took me a long time to choose the full season of my life. I don't know what impact that had on me. But I wish I knew that at 18. Because nobody, like in some places, was saying Black Lives Matter, and certainly not that mine did. Not in any resonant voice. You know, so yeah. Choose your life.
That's right. Choose life.
And build and create and create and build, right?
Build and create and build.
And
The
be
clan will die.
and be in the
Myers,
tradition.
You on your
Will
you on your 18-year-old self.
For me, I would say, you know, make sure that you experience your life. You know, just a really quick story. Rosa Parks died when I was 18, and I was actually on Howard University's campus at the time, and they actually drove her. They drove the hers by the school. I don't know where I was, but I didn't go see it. Right, and there's so many other examples of that being in a place like Howard at that age, and you just didn't know what the significance of those kinds of events were.
That's right.
And so just bear witness, you know, show up for your life, because those things just don't come every day. And so that's what I would tell my 18-year-old self.
Yeah. We have time for one last question. This comes from Tiffany W. And this is also a question for everybody. Do you think that real change or revolution can happen without violence?
You already have the violence. I mean, look what's happening.
There's already violence happening.
Well, that's straight up violence when you talk about people being frozen to death because of government neglect, right?
Right.
So I think oftentimes this question can kind of get tricky and almost work kind of as a trap, right? But the world that we are struggling against is more violent than we can ever imagine being in retaliation to it.
Right. Ask the colonists if they thought they could get change without violence.
Think about sequencing, like where are we also right now? Because I think the question also means, I love those answers, Raz and Dr. J. I keep shortening your name. But you know, societies live because of their social and political structures. And so what can we do to impact that? What's the sequencing of things, right? And I think that, you know, I'm writing this book with Baba Sekou Odinga right now. He's the brother who liberated Assata Shakur. And, you know, and he reflects, right? You got to think about everything. You got to think about it at the right time. He says to me at one point, I don't know if we would have made certain choices. We were pushed into choices. And I think the choice that we can make right now is us. I think that we can choose our culture, our ways, right? We don't have to be, as Dr. Earl Henderson says, a culturalist left. You can actually love us. As Raz noted earlier, as April lives and breathes, as Dr. Brenda does, right? We can actually choose to love us and occupy those seats in social and political structures that change things. So that's, I mean, I'd love to see that revolution happen. Imagine if every city in America was run by a Ras Baraka or a Shoko Antar Lumumba.
He's running for office again.
April 6th. Make a donation, April 6th.
Well, I think, yeah. So you're talking about the way forward. I mean, I think you laid out the pathway for the future and what we have to stay focused on and build on. So I want to really thank all of you for really this really enriching discussion, for this radical talk. When I say radical in a loving way, this important for really sharing and taking the time and enlightening some people who are in the audience and stating and motivating. This has been really enriching. We have a survey on a survey that we asked you to complete. I mean, the hosts and the panelists can't vote, but we appreciate if you can fill out the survey, complete the survey. That helps us. We want to continue to do programs like this. And I want to thank you, Clarence, our director, Laurie Daniel Favors, for opening the program. Our panelists, Asha Bendelli, April Silver, Dr. Joshua Myers, and our Mayor Ras Baraka. I want to thank our partners, the Center for Law and Social Justice and the CUNY Association of Black Faculty and Staff. And I'm just really, really excited. I'm very motivated. This has been really, really I'm really, really motivated because I see the fruits of the labor, the labor of the people who were active, the fruits, and I see what you're doing. And you are motivating the next generation. Yes, Laurie said that you're the elders, but you are elders in a way in your own right, because some of you, your children, now you're passing this on to your children who, your daughter is in college, your sons. This is the next generation. So the legacy is continuing. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Dr.
Dr. Greene, for your consistency. That's what keeps us going. Consistency.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank
Take
you,
care.
Pam.
Take
I
care.
also, I
And
also
buy the book. Yeah, the book. Shout out to African American Literary Book Club, the largest African American book club online. They have ordered books for this event. You can support us, support our writers, support our scholars by going out and purchasing the book. And it's a story. It starts out with the scholarship, but go through it because you get the story and it will leave you motivated. When I read this, I said, this should be required reading for all students. I think it's
Yes.
important. So thank you, Dr. Myers, for putting this out and for staying with it.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all so much.
Again, I want to thank everybody. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Simone, for our manager, our digital manager.
Yes,
Yes.
we can't forget Simone. Simone, wow, pulling it together.
Thank you so
We
much.
have to have digital managers now.
Yes. And again, for everyone who's still watching us, please continue to support the Center for Black Literature so we can continue to bring programs like this to you. You can visit us at centerforblackLiterature.org. We have a calendar of events that are up, particularly our National Black Writers Conference, the Biennial Symposium coming up on March the 27th. We will be celebrating the life and works of Paula Marshall and John A. Williams. And you can also hit the donate here button, and no contribution or no donation is too small or too large. Again, thank you all so very much. We truly appreciate you. And I hope everyone have a pleasant and wonderful evening.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.